Thanks again for inviting me here for giving this keynote speech. Thanks all of you for joining for the session, and it's my real pleasure to, well, really move on with the technical program actually. So talking a little bit more about ICT, particularly focusing on communications actually, and I have been asked to focus on a topic that is around since, maybe already since 15, 20 years now, which is called bio-inspired networking, and I will kind of take you to a tour. That's my aim, at least for the next minutes here. Some of you might not be that familiar with this particular topic, and so taking you to a tour to some interdisciplinary, very interdisciplinary kind of research that might help a lot actually in order to develop more efficient, more flexible algorithms in the ICT domain. And I will go on actually with a topic that is emerging out of this bio-inspired networking domain, even so not that much related actually, and this is called this Nano Communications. So you know that nano technology is on a hype these days. There is more and more promising results in the field of nano machinery, and also this nano machinery needs to communicate at some stage. And question is, I hope I can give you some insights today, how communication technologies from today need to change in order to support communication on that nano level. So this particular tour here is also supported by ACM. You heard about that, so certainly I included a slide just promoting ACM a bit here in this IEEE sponsored conference. Still, I believe that the ACM for computer scientists is a very, very helpful community, and in part they are also supporting this distinguished speaker program, which is essentially made this tour here possible. So for today, let me quickly start into what is a communication network, what is communications in general, and you know about this field. So communications, we have seen so many inventions since the last 50, 60 years. So I do remember the previous speaker was referring back to 1982. I remember at that time I had my first computer not networked at that time. But communication since that point in time rapidly evolved actually. So we know about the internet, scalable networks came up, mobile networks came up, but whenever we look at this technology, and you remember from your own perspective what have been the innovations in communications, actually there is no biology in there. So why are we talking about bio-inspired networking? Why does it make sense to talk about bio-inspired networking? Particularly because we see a lot of evolutions in these different types of networks. So when we remember the internet back in the 80s, was just a few computers interconnected. World Wide Web wasn't there yet. Email, yes. Little information systems, but not that much actually. If we look at the internet today, we see billions of computers interconnected. Websites interconnected, everything changed, business models changed in this world, and this is not ending, right? So we see a further evolution here in this, what we call this next generation internet. 5G is at the border, so we are developing new communication technologies for machine-to-machine communications, further increasing the number of devices interconnected, not just by one order of magnitude, by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. And that is a huge trend. That is a huge challenge, actually, that we can't easily solve with the given technologies that we have at hand. This holds for the classical internet technology. This even better holds for all wireless communications. So some of you, there's a session dedicated here on sensor networks. Some of you are working in this field, making computers smaller and smaller, having embedded systems in the order of weighing a gram or 2, still providing powerful computational capabilities and obviously connectivity to each other. So the number of the devices is exploding in this sense, right? And there's other challenges coming up that you see on the bottom of that slide here. So we might not only want to connect computers on this planet here. So there's some space missions going on. There's this hype, this vision of at some time building first colonies on the Mars. Communication changes a lot again because these delays, these links will have very high communication delays. So classical communication protocols that we are using today in the internet will no longer work. They will stop immediately working, actually. So we have to think about completely new concepts, actually, for dealing with these challenges. So we can go on for forever, particularly also when we go into these sensor networks, sensor and actor networks. But what we see from all these communication challenges that I just shown on the last few slides is that there's an evolution going on, and the same thing is something that we see not only in the communications world. This evolution is something that we actually provides us new demands, completely new demands. Talking about scalability in particular, right? So scalability from 1 billion computers today to 1 trillion tomorrow, and all need to be interconnected anytime, anywhere, to exchange, in part at least, huge data rates. So when we talk about high definition video exchange between machines for image processing applications, right? And we need to define some strategies here and find some strategies that are beyond of our technologies that we from the engineering perspective came up with in the past. So similar things have been observed in completely different disciplines, right? So, and you will know from your school classes, oh, there was this biology, there's this evolution in nature, and a lot of things happened actually in evolution, but in a completely different way as we engineers were thinking of. So we as engineers, we want to have solutions rapidly, instantly, changing completely paradigms that we used yesterday. Evolution, nature has a very nice property. They come up with some very elegant and very efficient solutions for many problems actually. But it took years, not only years, it took millions of years for coming up with these solutions. So question is, can we combine that? Can we learn something from nature? Can we see some of the algorithms that nature developed over millions of years and apply these algorithms in communications technology and maybe deriving solutions way better, orders of magnitude better actually than what we can do as using our classical engineering approaches that we see from the textbooks that we are developing, that we are presenting here at this conference, that we are discussing at this conference. And so there's a few characteristics of biological systems that kind of make these systems promising candidates for looking into, for studying them more and more deeply, because we look exactly for the same characteristics in our technical systems and our technical communication systems spanning the globe, interconnecting all these devices. And this list is certainly not comprehensive here. Let me pick a few of these bullet points on the list here, just to make you aware of the really elegant and efficient solutions here. So what we need is adaptation, adaptivity here. So when we change something in our networks, the network itself should be able to self-organize quickly without losing any efficiency in the network. And that should be independent on whether we do some technological changes because we had some new ideas, we developed some new devices, we changed parts of the network, we changed parts of the devices, but also certainly in some, let's say, disaster scenarios where parts of the infrastructure are gone in a second after a tsunami comes in or some earthquake happened. Still we need actually our ICT infrastructure operating all the time for supporting our needs. So you might remember many of these natural disasters taking place in all over Asia, in the US, everywhere actually, where the first problem actually arises interestingly, that communications is no longer available. And there has been some very interesting studies actually coming more from the psychological side that in such a disaster, the first question is for many of the involved people is not get some food, get some clothes. The first request by many of these people is tell their relatives we are still alive. And if without any communications technology, that's simply impossible. So we need to have adaptive and resilient communications technology that self-organize in these disaster scenarios immediately and very efficiently to set up a new network infrastructure again. So many of these features are observable in natural systems and biological systems as well. And the aim is actually for us to learn a lot, to try understanding the algorithms behind these natural solutions and trying to adapt these algorithms to the technical domain, to our domain, and making some of these concepts usable in our technical systems. So my aim here for the next minutes is introducing a bit. I selected one algorithm actually for giving you an insight on how this process of learning, of modeling, of applying to technical systems might work. This is just one example, right? Please keep that in mind. But I also want to start with kind of a warning where some lessons learned from the last many years of research in this field. And actually, when we look into these bio-inspired concepts, research does not only date back to the last 15 years as for bio-inspired networking. The first person who really explored in depth the options for using bio-inspired concepts and transferring that to technical systems was a German person, actually, Manfred Eichen. He won a Nobel Prize just for this research on what he called the hypercycle. And his aim, that dates back to the 1970s, that his aim was trying understanding certain biological systems and concepts, applying that to technical systems, and he succeeded for the first time. So he actually established a completely new research field or research community, if you want to call that like this, which is inherently interdisciplinary, right? So we as engineers, I am as an engineer, I can't do that research myself. I need research collaborations with people from very different fields, from biology, from physics, from medicine. And it's not only a one-way road. It's not only that or we as engineers, we can learn something. It's actually a two-way road. So after we learn something, we develop new technical systems. We can use these new technical systems to support the research on the biology side, on the physics side, and so on and so forth as well. The starting point for using these bio-inspired concepts is, well, understanding nature, yes, trying to mimic. Right? Trying to come up with a technical system that is mimicking what is going on in nature. And that is also what happened a lot in the early days of bio-inspired networking. Right? So something was studied, looks like a nice algorithm. We derived that, we modeled that, we came up with a technical solution, and we published a paper, right? This is what the typical scientific way was. But maybe this is not good enough. So we also have to ask ourselves all the time again, is mimicking alone good enough? And meanwhile, after these many years of research, I can tell you it's not. It's definitely not. So we have to not only understand what is going on, we not only have to formulate it correctly and model that correctly for developing technical solutions, but we also have to prove that these new ideas, these new algorithms really outperform our baselines, right? And this is something that unfortunately not always happened in the past. So the steps are for trying to come up with a new technical system, with a new ICT solution. We have to identify possible analogies. That is what we can do by discussions, that we can do by interdisciplinary discourse. We have to understand, certainly, some of these biological examples are not even understood by the biologists. We have to model that and then transfer, doing the engineering part and coming up with the required solutions. So let me give you one example, but I have a list of others. I want to pick, or I decided to pick an algorithm that is around since quite a number of years. It's well understood meanwhile. Many of you might have run into this algorithm already for some of your technical solutions. And the algorithm is called ant colony optimization. So it's inherently an optimization algorithm, heavily inspired by nature. But there's many others. So the list here on this slide is certainly also not complete. But I selected just this ant colony optimization as one example. And so how does it work? Well, biologists over many years studied the foraging behavior of ants. And they are quite efficient, actually. So if you look at what ants are able to do, is they are able to identify food sources that are somewhere around. So they have to search for that. They have to find an optimal path, an optimal road to go forth and back multiple times, many times actually. There have to be thousands of ants going back and forth in order to collect all this food. And if the food source is gone, they have to find for new food. So that is a task that is going on and on and on forever, actually. And the challenge here is to be in an unknown environment, to have no global knowledge. It's a fully distributed, inherently distributed task here. They have no global knowledge, and still they want to come up with an optimal solution, optimal in the sense of shortest path finding, right? Shortest time for delivery of the food, and being inherently scalable and inherently robust for any changes in the environment. And the task is rather straightforward. So let me show these pictures here, these small icons in a little larger. So what the ants are doing is essentially random search. So what this is being called is the so-called explorer ants. And these explorer ants search randomly, right? Randomly walking around. With some luck, they find something. All right, so my 3 ants are here going on, trying to find some food. So far, not successful. Right? After a while, right, it's a random process. After a while, we cannot say when, we cannot even say that it ever happens, but there's a high probability. With a high probability, some of these ants find some food. And now, okay, they take it, get it home, and the challenge here is now to tell others that this is a good path to this food source. And the ants use a little trick here, and this is a biochemical trick actually. So while searching for food, they leave some pheromone on the trail, so just being able to identify their road home. And if they are successful, they leave a second piece of pheromone on the track, right? So that's a biochemical they leave on the track. And this pheromone just tells others, oh, this was an ant that successfully found some food. Right? So and now you consider there's a little bit of pheromone on that trail. Just a little bit. And now the other ants modify their search, their random search. And the random search is no longer random. There's a random component in that search, but it's prioritizing paths that other ants were successful on already. So with a certain probability, the ant go that way that another successful ant already took. So it knows this is a high probability to find food, but with a certain probability, they still do random, right? And now consider you have not only 1, not 2, not 3, but 1,000 ants going for searching exactly using this algorithm, right? And what happens in this sense is the likelihood. I'm just talking about probabilities here, just talking about statistics. The likelihood that ants more and more converge to that shortest path or to a path that was successful is very high, right? And also these ants, when successful coming home, leave their pheromone, everything's fine. So further promoting this path. So question is, why should it be the shortest path, right? It's just a path that all the ants converge to. But now we have a random search, and this random search has not just this random component, but this random search has also a second component that is time. So the likelihood that an ant that returns successfully coming from a short path is certainly way higher, you can do simple statistics on that, is way higher than an ant returning on a very, very long path. Right? So the likelihood that ants converge to the shortest or to a very short path, not the shortest path maybe, is extremely high. Right? And now let's do this complete here and just to do some mathematical modeling for this process. This is the only formula I have in my slides, I promise. But it looks complicated, but it's indeed very, very simple actually. What is being described in this formula is just a random component, a random search, and there's the second component included here, that is what is this pheromone trail. So what is being described in this formula is the probability of an ant going from node I to a node J. So P is a probability, and this probability being described going from node I to node J is being described by the level of pheromone. This is this tau ij on this track compared to the pheromone on all alternative or all other possible passes. So if the pheromone on this particular pass is high, it's a higher probability, right? If the pheromone is low, it's a lower probability. So that's how you can deal with that. Simple example: if you have a choose of 2 tracks, no pheromone yet, it's a 50-50 chance. If one of the tracks already is a little pheromone on that track, the chance of this track is going higher than this 50%. Let's say 60% versus 40%, the other one. If a second ant left some pheromone, it goes up to 70% versus 30%. And so the route is, in this ant search, food search algorithm converge. A little more is needed actually, and this is also something that we learn from nature. So this way we would be able to find a short path, yes, quickly, yes. But what happens if there's some disruption in the environment? If there's some disruption in our network, maybe, right? And then all the ants would go this one stable path and fall into a trap, right? Whatever that happens. So what needs to be done is also kind of an continuous researching for alternative paths. And that is being done simply by, again, a very simple chemical process. And this chemical process, this pheromone dissolves over time, right? So we need to make sure that the level of pheromone decays over time. And this is, in nature, it's simply a dissolving process, decay process of the pheromone. In our artificial systems, we need to have some component in here, and component in here is just the lower equation, removing a little pheromone with every time step, and adding pheromone only if successful. And then we are done. And we can easily apply this formula into different search or optimization algorithms. And you can essentially ask for almost every discrete search algorithm for using ACO, ant colony optimization, and you might have a good chance that it has either already been tried, or you have a good chance that you find a good solution here, a good technical solution. Example that I have with me here is application to computer networks, and there's of course an algorithm that has been called AntNet or AntHockNet for mobile ad hoc networks, and it has been shown that using exactly the formula that I've shown you on the last slide with a little modification just for computer networking, this engineering process I was referring to, you can get to very, very efficient solutions. Just to give you an example, having a graph here out of one of these original papers comparing this AntHockNet to another algorithm for used in mobile ad hoc networks. And what you see on the left-hand side is the packet delivery rate for AntHockNet for increasing node speeds, so for increasing mobility in our network is way better than the technical solution. On the right-hand side, you see the average delay jitter, and also here this bio-inspired algorithm is classically outperforming the engineering solution that we had before. So far it's a good starting point, right? So it's a good starting point to go into, look more deeply into these bio-inspired algorithms. Other examples include, from the list I have shown before, Firefly Optimization. Do you notice fireflies flashing in synchrony? Some of you might have seen them already. Synchronization in massively distributed systems is still one of the most challenging technical problems. And this Firefly algorithm has been modeled by means of a pulse-coupled oscillator, so you can easily use the math just by using some differential equations, putting that math into your synchronization problem in distributed systems, and you get a solution, right? And there's so many others. My group investigated a lot in using concepts from cellular signaling processes from the molecular basis in using that for optimizing sensor network operations. And this, even though I skipped that here because just of time issues, is a good motivation actually for going one step further. And one step further actually brings us to the field I already mentioned, at least in the beginning, which is called Nano Communications, or Nano and Molecular Communications as listed here. And this is something rather new actually, and the community working in this field is just forming. Since, meanwhile, 3 years, ACM has a dedicated conference on nano communications. So this year it will happen just in a month from now, I guess, in Washington. So it's an emerging field of research. So it's a young community, but it's on a good track actually, and a good track coming up with not only ideas and visions, but with some first even technical solutions here. So what am I talking about? Nano-scale communications. So there's a lot of effort and meanwhile good results in the field of nanomachinery. So nanomachines, nanotechnology in general is based on two possible approaches actually. One is the classical way, so doing some artificial nanomachines, and you might have heard that some of the successful experimental stuff is already in the scope at least of 100 nanometers length machineries. So really small devices. So it's not exactly at the 1 nanometer level, but hundreds of nanometers at least, where you can build artificial machines. Meanwhile, there's tons of applications for that. I have next slide some particular applications around. But it's not only these artificial nanomachines that are of interest. There's some nanomachinery that is currently being investigated and developed in this world that I would call natural nanomachines. Even though natural is a bit misleading maybe. It's natural systems just being modified for acting as a nanomachinery. So you could, for example, use what is being called molecular motors or some bacteria to act as a nanomachine in a certain environment. Where right, sounds very easy. It's the most complicated task at all, and the next solution, the real solution to this field will get the next Nobel Prize, I guess. Reprogramming bacteria, for example, to doing some meaningful work in the human body. But this is a very helpful and strategic research activity actually. And for me, as a communications person, the interesting question is, what about assuming we have many of these nanomachines around? How can they coordinate? How can they communicate? Do they need to communicate? And if so, how can we do so? Right? And this is the point where I want to, again, give you a slight tour on what is the current state of the art in this nano communications and what can be done and what are the open challenges here. But let me start with some applications. And the first application I have in mind always is everything that is in this biomedical domain. And one very good example is shown on the right side in this picture here. And the idea here is using nanomachines for drug delivery within the body at a very specific position and time. So programming nanomachines to deliver certain biochemical drugs, for example, to tumor cells or others. and not just giving that somewhere in your blood system, and maybe at some point the drugs is also delivered to the tumor cell, but also infecting or influencing all the rest of your body. But using very targeted drugs and using nanomachinery actually to get it there. So using that as a carrier, as a vessel in your blood system, if you want to say, right? And then you can, right, like shown on the right-hand side, so the nanomachine arrives at this tumor cell in this example. It releases some drugs, and hopefully this released drug will help curing this particular disease. Right? But there's so many other examples in this biomedical field here, and that not only starts from heart monitoring. You use your heart monitor, your rate monitor every day when jogging, I guess. But you might want to even control internal effects in your body depending on your heart control. So, for example, for preventing some heart attacks early, having a nanomachine, detecting that and releasing certain drugs whenever there's a certain peak or spike that has been observed, and there's no time left for you to do some drug release from the outside. So medication is a big thing, but also there's at least the idea of using some biohybrid implants where you might be able to provide some functionality of your body that has been destroyed by some emergency. There's certainly other applications, unfortunately also in the military field, but I want to focus more on this industrial field when it comes, for example, to detecting certain water quality, for example, or food quality in the production process, using nanomachinery that is distributed inside of these tanks where this is being produced. So we have the examples, we have the nanomachinery currently being developed. Let's look at the communications side. And one of the possible communications between nanomachines, at least within a human body or animal body, is what is being called molecular communications. And molecular communications is actually the way cells, our cells in our organs, communicate with each other on a regular basis. So this is how our body functions actually. And we could use exactly the same concepts for not having this normal communication of our cells, just for controlling growth of cells or growth of organs, but for exchanging information between nanomachinery within our body. So comparing to traditional communications, or traditional wireless communications, we change from electromagnetic radio communications to what is being called molecular communications. So molecules are then the information carriers. So we need to be able to modify these molecules, to program these molecules in a way to carry information. So we have to talk a bit about what is the kind of information density you can transmit between these nanomachines if successful. And certainly we are limited to certain constraints here too. And one of the biggest constraints is that we change from radio communication speed of light to very slow fluid communications or transportation of small particles in a fluid environment, which is comparably slow actually. So very, very slow actually. So and that is something we need to understand, we need to design, and in order to understanding, we need to figure out how exactly is the communication path of these molecules in a human environment. And what happens actually is many related biochemical reactions that we need to understand and that we need to artificially manipulate. Right? So this, what is shown here, is a typical molecular communication pathway that is used in our cells for normal communications with their neighboring cells. So what is being called some ligands, that is primary messengers. Essentially, you can think of that as some RNA strands that can be used for, or proteins that are encoded with some information, is being received by a cell very specifically because these biochemically bind to some receptors. It's a very specific binding, so only ligands are considered that are fitting this exact binding here for the cell. And only if this binding is successful, then the cell takes over and does some reaction on that. And this is somehow similar to what we know about communications, right? In our telecommunication networks, we design some packets. These packets have typically a header, the header describing the destination address, maybe even some more information of what is relevant for a receiver. This time, we need a biochemical address that needs to be added to our information carriers. And this biochemical address can be designed artificially, it can be designed naturally, or we exploit some naturally designed addresses, and just have to provide the same biochemical, or can exploit the same biochemical reactions for artificial systems, artificial nanosystems to communicate to each other. A second way for doing so is not by having these proteins as a information carrier, but a second mechanism that is also used in the human body. That is just by means of signaling via some chemicals. And the most, let's say, well-known example is what is being called calcium signaling for communication between neighboring cells. What cells do is via some so-called gap junctions, they release some calcium. Calcium concentration is increasing outside the cell. That is changing the potentials on the cell surface of the neighboring cell. So it's an electrical reaction in the first place. And based on that electrical reaction, the other cell also opens some gap junction, receives that calcium, and takes over again because of potential changes within this neighboring cell. So this biochemical process is something that we can very easily take over for designing some artificial communications here. But again, this is a very different from let's say internet or wireless communications. Here we have no destination address at all. The only information that can be used for transmitting information is a level of concentration. So we can change the level of a concentration, and based on that level of information, we can encode a few bits of information maybe that we can use for exchanging information between these neighboring nanomachines. And we can use that for short distance. We can also use it for longer distance, as shown on the lower left, via multiple cells that react as they are supposed to be, and just help us as a relay between two nanomachines, just by forwarding this calcium signaling among these different cells. There's more fancy ways of communications in the body, and more fancy also for nano communications. And one example is what is being called so-called molecular motor. And this molecular motor is, you see the diagram on the right-hand side, is again a biochemical process where parts of, or where biochemicals bind to this microtube and release again from this microtube on a periodic fashion. And based on this periodic fashion, you can make a few of these binding chemicals kind of wandering around along this microtube. So they can walk along this microtube. And walking along this microtube is not that much of a let's say, special effect here. But the really interesting thing is that the forces for binding on this microtube are extremely strong. So you can bind rather large and complex structures to this molecular motor for carrying some micro or nanomachine along such a microtube. And these microtubes can be manufactured now in labs very easily. So they can be meters long, no problem. They are very, very thin, in the diameter of really a few nanometers, and you can carry lots of information along such a microtube. This one I already mentioned, so you might be able to program some already existing bacteria. One interesting candidate is what is being called this flagellated bacteria. So they have a flagellum which allows them to steer in a fluid environment. And using that steering in this fluid environment, you can simply load this bacterium, so remove the original RNA from this bacterium and load some new information into this bacterium and use it as an information carrier within any type of fluid environment inside the body. So within your blood, within other water or liquid filled places in your human body. And what you get is an information carrier. You get information from A to B. Here you can even steer. And the nice thing about the steering is you can even modify that steering from the outside. What you can do here in this particular example is you can apply a magnetic field from the outside, and this magnetic field changes the steering of this bacteria within your body. So you can make the bacteria going a certain way within your body just by applying a magnetic field from the outside. So you have a good way of interacting from the outside to the inside just by using a rather simple magnetic field. So I could go on with these kind of natural examples. But what I want to do is switching to the more technical system here. So we can certainly do nano communications between these nanomachinery using classical technical solutions. And that is maybe the most straightforward way for many of us here in the room who are not that deep into biochemistry or biology. Radio communications is a very, very straightforward example. It has been explored already in the laboratories. What you see here is a so-called nanotube radio. So the length of the antenna is in the order of 100 nanometers, and you can disseminate radio waves at the terahertz band from this nanotube antenna. What you have to do now is transmitting the the transmitter logic and the receiver logic for using this nanotube radio station, and you can modulate information on that terahertz information channel like you do in your gigahertz radio communications here in the Wi-Fi network. Question certainly is, can I do classical modulations in nanomachines the size of a few, let's say, micrometers? Do I have enough energy for designing nanotubes, for nanotube radios that can propagate radio waves farther away than a few millimeters? So we're talking of totally different dimensions here in this field compared to what we do in our classical Wi-Fi powered world. But if you have these devices designed, and again, some first devices have been designed in the lab already, then you can start developing larger networks. So based on carbon nanotube radios, you can come up with mobile ad hoc networks in the size of nanometers, used in a body or used in a tank of water for water quality measurements and so on, using the same concepts that we currently explore and develop in the radio communication technologies outside of the body in our classical networks. So, kind of summarizing this nano communications part, what we see is that, well, first of all, not all these nanomachinery might need communications. Some of them might rely finally on just having a motor, doing some actions locally without interacting, without coordinating with other devices. But others are very, very powerful if coordination would be possible,
if this interaction between these nano devices would be possible. So if these nano devices need to be communicated, then we have the choice of actually a bunch of flowers of different communication technologies, ranging from carbon nanotube terahertz radio, which many of us might understand easily, to having this molecular communications, which is kind of in between, or even going to these more advanced systems like this flagellate bacterium, where you design a new bacterium that you load with information, sending this information, and so on and so forth. The main challenge that I haven't touched at all in this talk is how do we secure the system, right? So we want to use that in a human body. We want to use that for drug delivery, for other medical applications. What are the security challenges here, right? And how do we encrypt communication that is currently then being done by means of artificially designed protein? How do we ensure privacy of communication between these nano devices that we don't want to reveal to others outside, or which could give relevant information about our constitution at the moment to others that we don't want to share? And these are challenges that are currently being addressed, but it's a very, very slow process, and we are at the very, very beginning, actually, when it comes to all the security issues. So let me conclude. Bio-inspired networking is a field that is not that new. So that is a field that is around, that is a field you can learn a lot from existing papers, from existing publications. There have been some, let's say, mistakes in the early days of this bio-inspired networking, when it came mainly about mimicking biological systems without carefully checking the performance and carefully doing the engineering process in order to get some technically optimal solutions. But there have been some very promising approaches. Ant colony optimization is one of the very good examples, which I have introduced today to you, which you can use out of a box, which is meanwhile in a very well accepted system in technical solutions. In the second part, I addressed some of these nano communications challenges. This is very new. So the first works date back to maybe 10 years, but 10 years ago it was really emerging field. So there was very little work. Meanwhile, since a few years, there's laboratory experiments going on. So it's no longer a visionary idea. So there's experimental stuff going on. There's analytical stuff going on, and there's many communications engineers needed actually to explore these challenges, to explore these options actually that we have for this nano communications in order to come up with, well, the next Nobel Prize maybe, let's see. For today, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me, and I hope I gave you some inspirations for the next years to do some research, and thanks a lot for joining me here.